Welcome to Paranormal M, your guide to the most unsettling and supernatural stories. Don't forget to hit subscribe and activate notifications to follow our latest spine-chilling content. Enjoy the spooky journey. My grandma's house has some sort of mimic. I think that's the right word for what it is, but I've also seen people call it similar things like doppelgangers, so maybe that's right. My grandma's house has weird goings-on since I was born, pretty much. Mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs, VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. Anyway, it seems one of them may be a mimic. My grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncle saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. I thought maybe he had come home without them noticing. His car wasn't in the driveway either. Oh, either time. Came home later and insisted that he had been home. My mother also claimed that she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes. It scared her because she knew that logically it wasn't right. But it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother. And now my personal experience. My sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, especially through high school even. We all slept in her bed and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. I woke up one morning, but I was still in a state of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and I saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway looking at me. I figured she'd just come up to see if I was awake yet, but then she leaned backwards out of the doorway and out of sight. Something about the way she moved just wasn't quite right. And that's when I realized I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. It struck me as odd that she would walk away from bacon while it was on the stove. She was in her 70s at this time, and, well, she got around well for her age. Taking the stairs was still a bit of a task and took some time. It didn't make sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs to look at me. She could have just yelled up at me to see if I was up. I called out to ask her if she was upstairs. From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs. She walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said, "No." She was apparently just making bacon. I freaked out a little bit. Got out of bed, booked it downstairs. My sister was already awake and downstairs with my grandma, which is why she was already making bacon before it was up. Both of them said that she had not been upstairs, so I told them what happened. That's when my grandpa told us the stories I told above about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there. Our experience with Anne something mysterious in Zion. Interesting title. This story took place in the winter of 1997. Me and my friend, who I'm going to call Will, were camping in Zion National Park, Utah. Not sure whether or not camping is or was illegal at the time, as we're both from Maine. We're both devout Mormons, so we were visiting the area to connect with other like-minded people. We first went to the park sometime in the middle of January, so the weather was very frigid. We decided to make a camp in a small clearing somewhere near a great staircase. Staircase? We set a small tent up underneath a few trees. Things went fine for the first few nights. On the third morning, Will woke up in a cold sweat in the wee hours. He had had a vivid nightmare of a creature with matte black eyes following through the canyon. We brushed it off as just that, a nightmare. Later that morning, we went up to the ridge to do some sightseeing. Will was eerily quiet. I asked him if he was all right, and he told me that he had been to this part of the park before. Neither of us had been here in days prior. He realized that He'd seen it in his dreams. We were both spooked but brushed it off as a coincidence. Went back to camp later that afternoon and we thought nothing of the coincidence from earlier. That night when we went to cook up some of the hot dogs that we'd brought along with us, we searched and searched for them. They were all but missing. Once again, we just assumed that we mustn't have packed them. But Will was certain as he saw them earlier. We decided not to worry about it and we ate some protein bars that we'd packed for hiking. Things went fine for the rest of the night, but couldn't help but feel there was something wrong. 2 days later, Will woke up in the night again. This time was different, though. His nose was bleeding with thick black blood, and his shirt was covered in dirt and mud. And one other minor detail I forgot to mention. He woke up 2 miles from the tent. I only found him because I heard him screaming from out in the brush. I went and found him, helped get him back to the tent. Well, excuse me. This is crazy. Helped get home back to the camp. When we returned, we found a small bird skull at the top of Will's bedroll. The howls of the coyotes and the other similar creatures that we had heard in the nights prior were non-existent, leaving the canyon strangely silent. Later that day, we went for another hike. We were about 8 miles from our camp at this point. Being that this was the days before cell phones and we were in a canyon, there was no way that we could have contacted for help if we got lost or injured. Our car was at least 6-hour hike from where we were camping. We happened by a small clearing, and at the edge of the tree line we found a small cave. Being the naive, curious young boys we were, we ventured out in search of adventure. Inside the cave there was no sounds, but the echoes of our footsteps were heard. The ground was strewn with bones of small birds, not dissimilar to the skull that we found on Will's bedroll. Will went to inspect one of the skulls. However, upon picking it up, we both had an overwhelming sense of dread filling us both. Our ears began to ring intensely and our heads began to vibrate. It was violent. The sound was like static from a radio, and it caused us both to immediately have a terrible headache. I screamed at Will that we needed to leave. He couldn't even hear me over this static ringing sound. I couldn't even hear myself. I grabbed his arm and we ran for the mouth of the cave. We decided that we'd had enough. We were going to leave. The ringing subsided as we got further from the cave. However, as we neared the camp, the sense of dread became even stronger. The camp had been destroyed. Our equipment was left dangling from trees. We tried to collect our things, but we were too overcome with fear. We didn't hesitate. We picked up from all the things of value that we could carry, and we began to long walk back the car. It was about 5 p.m. by this point, and if we started... Sorry, the spelling errors are intense. If we started walking now, we'd be back to the car by about 11. We trekked back with no issues for about 2 hours. By 7 p.m. it was pitch black and there was no light except from Will's lighter. The forest was suddenly filled with the sounds of hundreds of creatures howling and crying. We could make out the silhouettes of several tall deer along one of the high cliff faces. The deer looked sickly and their eyes were blacker than the sky. I tried to ignore them, but it just seemed like they were following us. We dropped everything and we just began to run. Somehow we made it back to the car in just a couple of hours. The sounds of the forest didn't die down the entirety of the journey. Once we get back to the car, we assumed the battery would be dead, but we had unintentionally left the car lights on for several days. Luckily, almost as if it were a miracle, the car started fine. Got out of the park without a hitch. As of writing this, it's been 23 years since this happened, but the story still haunts me. Hadn't seen Will in several years as he moved away to a different state. I decided to write her story in honor of his memory, as I learned this morning of his passing. He'd been suffering from depression long before experience, but I feel that the traumatic nature of the event only amplified his condition. To this day, I don't have a clue what it was in the park. I've never told the story to a single person until now. Will and I have never even spoken of the events after they happened. I'd like to believe it was all just a nightmare or shared delusion. But we know it was much more than that. Anyways, that's our story. I know it was long, but it means a lot to have shared it with someone. In loving memory of Will Foster. Fly high, brother. I think my boyfriend and I live with ghosts. My boyfriend and I moved into an apartment 9 months ago. I think there could be ghost kitties here. We have 2 cats of our own, and we've seen both cats acting as if they're chasing something that isn't there. Their toys have gone missing every now and then too, but what's spooky is I found 2 of their soft toys under our kitchen sink behind a board that's blocking that area off. And I only found them because I accidentally kicked the board down there and I was doing dishes. Recently, there's been activity that I don't think ghost kitties could do, though. Cabinets have opened, light and heavy things have been thrown. Our shower curtains move every now and then, and electronics seem to die quick. Our TV brightness dims and brightens. I do enjoy watching scary movies, and I decided that I'd watch one until my boyfriend got home from work. After the first movie was over, the energy in our living room felt different. I wasn't sure if this was because I was a little bit spooked from watching The Conjuring 3 or what. Mr. B, one of our cats, he was staring at the corner with his ears back for a bit. All of a sudden, my beanie that was on the table flew at him, hit him, and made him run away to hide. It scared me a bit, so I went to stood in our kitchen for a while, and I was there. A breeze flew by me. I decided I needed to step out. My stomach was feeling sick. When I stood outside our apartment, I heard one of the cats meow and the dishes move. I decided to go back in there because I couldn't leave our babies alone. While I was sitting in the kitchen, one of the cabinets creaked open. This is where I almost started to cry. Luckily, my boyfriend got home a few minutes later. I've experienced things happening before, and I felt fine, but the energy I've just been feeling the past couple of days is making my stomach knot. Another thing that concerns me is that some of the things seem to go missing. Back in October, I put my earrings on our bedside table and went to bed. Wanted to put them back on a few days later, but they were gone. Thought maybe one of the cats knocked them onto the floor. Well, we looked everywhere in our room, we still haven't found them. We also lost my boyfriend's main car keys. We have a big jar on one of the tables in our living room, so we put our keys, our wallets, and coins in it. My boyfriend places things down. I always end up picking them up and putting them in the jar before bed. Well, he came home late at night, and I was already asleep, put all the things down at the coffee table, keys, wallet, etc. I woke up in the morning and everything but his keys were still there. I deep cleaned our whole apartment and still haven't found the things that have gone missing. I've also noticed red marks show up on my skin that weren't there minutes before. By the way, these are just a few experiences I've witnessed. There have been a lot more. They only seem to be the most active around me. My boyfriend has only witnessed a few things happening to him, and most of the time it's the little things while I'm in the room with him. I feel like the energy in our apartment has shifted. Now I start to feel sick almost every time I witness something happen. Is there a way to cleanse the negative energy I keep feeling? I probably gifted my mother-in-law a haunted box for Christmas. So I'll start off by saying I'm very into the paranormal. However, I maintain that I'm a skeptic. I haven't really had any outlandish experiences, nothing like a ghost screaming in the ear for like seeing a full-body apparition. Mostly stuff like feeling uneasy in certain areas and like hearing little whispers and creaks and groans. Seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I also experience hallucinations, so I try to keep that in mind too. I also like to shop at Goodwill, a lot. You can get a lot of cheap junk there, and I love junk, especially dolls. I have a few quote-unquote haunted dolls, a few that are just decoration, but nothing I've ever gotten from Goodwill I ever considered actually haunted, until recently. My significant other, I always trip over that word. My significant other and I went to the Goodwill a day or so ago to pick up some last-minute gifts. And as we were looking around, I see this large wooden box that's mostly black. Has some hand-painted birds and things. It's pretty old, maybe 25, maybe even 50. I don't really know, but I knew my mother-in-law would love it. She's got kind of an affinity for boxes. So we pick it up and head out of there. No uneasy feeling for it, no feeling at all, really. Maybe I was too scatterbrained at the time, not really listening to my sixth sense that I might have. That night I get to bed relatively early, which is kind of unusual for me, as I really have a hard time falling asleep and usually don't go to bed till like 4 in the morning. Maybe an hour after I fall asleep, I suddenly wake up, experience what I'm assuming was sleep paralysis. My head's tucked under my significant other's shoulder and between pillows, so I can't see anything. But I could feel there was someone else. I told myself to relax and it'll pass. Like I'll be able to sleep soon. This isn't the first time I've had paralysis, and it's probably not going to be the last. Granted, it hasn't happened for at least 3 years. Suddenly I get the urge to turn my head and look at the door leading to the bedroom to my attic. Which, in itself, is a terrible, terrible place and another haunted story for another day. But I know I shouldn't look because I'll probably see something I don't want to. I can't exactly move away. For some ungodly reason, the urge to turn my head and look was so strong I felt like, holy shit, I'm breaking out of sleep paralysis. Isn't that a first? I didn't look though, thank God. But the presence that I felt earlier was stronger, and I was getting that scary little demon girl and a horror movie vibe. Eventually I fell back asleep without realizing it. When I woke up, I had the worst pain in my chest and my neck was all tied in one side. I'm talking it felt like I had somebody punching my chest every time I took a breath or moved. Like if I tried to turn my head, just felt like my neck would explode. This happened the next night as well, but I have no idea whether or not it happened a third because it was Christmas Eve. So it's my time to wrap it up and send it off to my mother-in-law. I didn't say anything to her because I honestly didn't attribute what was going on to the box. Actually, completely forgot all about it until I had to wrap it. Since I've given it to her, however, I've been sleeping like a baby and woke up feeling refreshed and without any aches or pains. I'm interested in sort of talking to her a little bit down the road, saying if she's experienced any of the same things. Maybe if that box really is a spooky demon box, she'll say something before I get the chance to bring it up. I don't want to be that guy, but you kinda should do something about it before something bad happens. You should probably do that. Do you guys agree? Let her find out, I guess. The thing at my dad's house. I firmly believe that there are many unexplained things in this world. You know, the things that we have a hard time discussing with others because you don't want to be labeled as crazy. But you know, well, they're all the same. My dad's house, I believe, contains such an entity. There really isn't one big story to tell, but rather a bunch of small ones that combine into something really hard to write off as sheer coincidence. Most of these are told from my dad's perspective, although I was able to experience one for myself. I was spending the night at Dad's house one time, and we were on the living room watching TV. My little sister was sitting on the couch with my dad and stepmom. I was sitting in the recliner with one of the dogs. The other dog was laying in front of the couch. There was a gecko screaming at me. In between the couch and the recliner was an end table, and sitting on the table was a glass box and my stepmom, well, I guess got for her mom. Or rather, from. We were paying it no mind when we heard a crash. We weren't expecting it, so we all jumped. The glass box on the table had fallen off the backside of the table and broke. The glass box had been sitting a good distance away from the edge, so it couldn't have fallen on its own. No one was close enough to bump the table either. It was like somebody lightly pushed the box off the edge, like a cat would do. We investigated for several minutes before chalking it up to another one of quote-unquote those incidents. My dad was standing in the middle of the living room watching the TV. It was in the middle of the day and he was the only one home. And suddenly from the direction of his and my stepmom's bedroom, he heard a loud and deep, "Ha-ha!" His first thought was somebody had broken into his house, so he ran in there ready to beat the daylights out of the intruder, only to find an empty room. He looked around for a while and didn't find anyone there. Another time my dad was in the living room again, and it was just him and the dogs. He got up to grab the remote and he made a comment. You know, the kind you make when you think out loud. Then he heard somebody hiss, "Silence!" into his ear. My dad, the king of underreactions, simply grabbed the remote on his way back to the chair and said, "How about you shut the fuck up?" He didn't hear anything else for the rest of the day. One night when my dad and stepmom had just gotten in bed, they just pulled the sheets over them, the door that leads to the bathroom shook. I'm not talking about some mild shaking that may come from an old house. It was like somebody took hold of the door itself and was violently trying to shake it off its hinges. Needless to say, my stepmom was glad that my dad wasn't working nights that night. Along with these things, there's some shadow people, like sightings, I guess you could say. They're made by both my dad and my little sister. One time in the middle of the day again, my dad was in the kitchen watching one of his football shows. Something compelled him to look toward the entrance of the kitchen. He saw shadowy, disembodied feet walk across the entrance. My dad, once again the king of underreactions, looked out of the kitchen. When he saw nothing, he shrugged his shoulders, went back to his football. This sighting is something that both my dad and my little sister swore up and down that they saw. On the right back corner of the living room, there's a very short hallway with 3 doors. A door to the bathroom, a door to my room, and a door to what used to be my sister's room, but is now used for storage. The 2 bedroom doors are on the right side with the bathroom door right in front of them. You can see the bedroom doors from the living room. They saw a shadow figure leave the bathroom and head into the storage room. That being said, the storage room seems to be where this thing dwells when it isn't bothering my family. It's to the point that my sister refuses to ever go into that room again. Even just walking past that room is enough to cause your hairs to stand on end. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to stop here. And if you have any idea what we're dealing with, please let me know. Haunted apartment. So when I turned 18, I just graduated high school. This was 2017. After the summer, I found a BRAND new apartment. Literally, not one building was up. There was only a trailer for the office. I got a new 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment and moved in shortly after the first half of my building was finished. Anyways, just a little bit of an intro. Nothing happened in the beginning. Everything was cool and the apartment was usually quiet. Right around before summer 2018, my roommate, we're going to call her Jessica, moved out, right? So I found that my good friend was looking for a roommate, but didn't have her own apartment yet. So, we picked each other up and she ended up moving in. All was fun and games until about 2 to 3 week mark of her moving in. Things super low-key started happening. It wasn't serious. They were, I would say, scientifically explainable things. The drawer would be open, our bedroom doors would be open, or sometimes we would leave them open to let our house heat up at nights. The doors would be closed when we came back. Our bedrooms were carpeted and the door had a hard time itself opening and closing because of the carpet. A couple more weeks go by and it tenses a little bit. We started to hear the doors close. We would see black shadows from my room. My room was straight back and I had red lights hanging in my room that were on all the time. Thought it was just dark, but it's dark and our eyes played trick on us, but no big deal. Things were also misplaced all the time. Things would randomly be tipped over. And okay now, it was maybe 2 or 3 month mark of her living there. Her roommate came home and was taking a bath in her bathroom. She heard footsteps in the hallway. She said that she 100% swore it was me. She said my name, but nothing came. She messaged me and I was still at work. She recalls even hearing the skin to floors if the feet were sweaty. We can't even hear anything from our downstairs neighbors. We were on the top floor. I started hearing it a few weeks later. She only signed a 6-month lease because she wanted to get her own place near college. So I met a girl at work, and she would be Grace and her boyfriend Kyle. Grace immediately caught on to the activity in the house, and it was very frequent. It was like whatever it was wanted to be known. My friend Hannah likes to come and stay a couple of days, and the one time she was staying, Grace and I left for work that morning. Kyle was staying the night before, but he had a convention at the place Grace and I worked at. So he and Grace rode together for work while I took my own rig. About halfway through my shift, I noticed that Hannah was online, therefore must have finally woken up. Almost instantly, she messaged me and said, "Is Grace's boyfriend still here?" I forgot that he came to work for the convention, so I said, "Yeah." She replied, "Oh, okay, good." Kinda scared me. Heard somebody coming from Grace's room. I started to remember that Kyle did have to come here. So I asked Grace if he was, he for sure was here, and she said yes, because they rode together. I called Hannah and told her, and she freaked out. I got home later with her with all the lights on and the curtains pulled back. She explained to me that she kept hearing something coming from Grace's room while she was sleeping. She thought it was snoring, so she assumed it was Kyle. Finally got so loud that Hannah just woke up and got on her phone. She said even then the noise got louder until it just stopped. I discussed it with my friend who suggested it might be like a snarling or growling. Hannah went pale, quickly came to realize that it was exactly what it was. We saged up the house and all, but nothing ever helped. Things continued to go on, and I was forced to move homes recently. I know it was still haunted. The footsteps down the hallways were so real. There were times I thought it was my cousin or Hannah walking down and I was in the bathroom. Thought I'd scare them while I was coming out and they would still be sitting in the living room, or they'd be sleeping. The lights also flickered last month in my living there, and it was pretty late. Happened for no reason. It wasn't even consistent flickers. They were random and different with each light in the house. I also sometimes woke up at like 3 or 3:30 at night for no reason. I was terrified. Absolutely no reason. I had 3 roommates total, and my first roommate moved back in with Grace moving out, so even though I didn't say anything to her about anything, because I wanted to see if it was real, I got a little bit lost in that story. I was a skeptic that changed last night. Honestly, still shook up, so sorry if this is kind of all over the place. Not really sure where to start, so that doesn't help either. I guess I'll just say everything, meaning this may be a very, very long post. When I was a child, I absolutely believed in ghosts, and the idea of them fascinated me. But as I got older, seeing shows on TV or videos on the internet that were clearly fake or extremely suspicious turned me into a non-believer and most very skeptical. I'm now 21 and just moved out of my uncle's place into my own apartment. It's a very old building, maybe 100 plus years old. It's a pretty large house that's been turned into like a fourplex. It even has a historical building plaque outside on it, though I'm having trouble finding any information. 3 of the 4 apartments were just remodeled this year. The one that wasn't is because it was occupied at the time. At the moment, it's just me and him in the building. I'm on the top floor on one side, he's on the other side, ground floor. Been here about almost a week now. Of course, I've heard your generic old building noises, creaks and snaps of the cooling fall temperatures, that sort of thing. There was a couple of times in the first 2 days that I thought I saw movement at the corner of my eye. Didn't really think anything of it. All seemed fairly well until last night, or rather the night before last. I was in bed watching YouTube on my phone, lying down, not quite on my back. Not really quite on my side either. I was holding up my phone, my arms eventually got tired. As I was setting down my phone on my bed, I could have sworn from behind where I was, just holding my phone, a very, very faint shadow like a head or a face was there and quickly ducked out of my view. Now, I realize that sounds absolutely terrifying, and I was very tired and was just staring directly at the bright screen of my phone. And what I saw was very, very faint. I figured if I had really saw something, it was a minor hallucination. Slept well, got up, went to work. Came home and relaxed for a few hours in a very good mood. Took a shower, got into bed. Fell asleep between 2 or maybe 2:30. Woke up at some point between 3 and 4. It's unusual for me to wake up many times at night. Turned to lie on my right side and I stretched a bit and just lie for about 5-10 minutes. At this point, I'm absolutely wide awake. The night is absolutely still and absolutely silent. Gets to the point where it's time to flip over, and as I do, the unthinkable happens. As clear as day from the side that I'm flipping over to, not any more than 7 feet away from me, a female voice at normal conversation volume says something. In my absolute shock and disbelief, I didn't fully catch what she said. Pretty sure it was 3 syllables or words, the first of which I'm fairly certain was he's. At this point, I'm absolutely horrified. Just started shaking and sweating and on the verge of crying. This voice was so incredibly clear and real that I can tell you with absolute certainty she was in her mid-20s. It originated from 5.5 feet off the floor. Also, in all honesty, it did feel like what she said was directed at me. Couldn't tell you why, but it really seemed to me like she was answering somebody else's question about me. Perhaps it wasn't about me at all. Once I got my courage back, I tried as hard as I possibly could to recreate what I heard. Thought that my bed had just made a noise that my brain had somehow recognized as a female human speech pattern. Couldn't for the life of me get my bed to make a noise that sounded even remotely similar to it, let alone even close to as loud as she spoke. I've had sleep paralysis many times, and this was not it. Like I said, I was completely 100% awake. I didn't really think about it at first, but the side of the room the voice came from was the same side of the room that I thought I may have seen that slight shadowy head figure the night before. Still in shock. I'm not sure if I'm crazy or what. All I know is that I've never ever had anything like that happen in my life before. If you honestly read this far, I applaud you. Very much appreciate it. If you've ever experienced something like this, I'd love to hear about it. I want to know that I'm not going insane. Also, my mom gave me a voice recorder. I don't really know how long we can record at a time, but I might just see if I can have it record as I sleep all night. I would have kicked myself for posting here a year ago, but here goes nothing. My dog might have pulled a Lazarus. 2 weeks ago, my little dog Max died. He was diagnosed with an illness a few months ago with an uncertain prognosis, but I could tell the end was coming. My best friend was going to pick me up at 9 a.m. on Friday morning, and I was going to have him put to sleep as his illness was progressing and his quality of life had, declined severely. However, the night before we were going to take him, he passed in his sleep, which I thought was a blessing. He was right in his bed, right beside me. Me and my 2 best friends had a nice little funeral service in the backyard that evening. That's where we buried him and told silly stories about our little buddy. The whole thing was bittersweet. We shed a lot of tears, but we also had champagne and talked about his little sassy, yappy self. 2 nights after Max's death, me and my young daughter were in the kitchen. We were playing pretend lemonade stand. She was standing and I was sitting on the floor. When I pushed up off the floor and twisted around to get up, I saw a 3D gray, almost opaque, but just so slightly transparent version of Max. He walked from behind the kitchen island and walked right up to the kitchen door that leads to the back porch. Just kind of slowly faded through it. There were no defining features such as a nose, eyes, or mouth, but the body shape and the head shape and the ear shape and the gait were a complete giveaway that it was Max. He's been mine for 11 years, so I know his body and his walk as good as my own. I was pretty jarred, but I wrote it off quickly as my grieving brain playing tricks on me. Until my 3-year-old looked up at me and said, "Mama, was that Black Shadow Max? How did he go through the door?" I was gobsmacked. If I had seen it myself, I wouldn't have given much thought. But the fact that my toddler saw him too makes me think that my brain was not playing tricks on me. I still feel so weird about it. The toddler thinks it was the coolest thing ever and won't stop talking about it. Although now she's confused because I reiterated to her a dozen times, in an age-appropriate way, that Max was not coming back after we buried him. Now she keeps saying that I lied to her. I like that story. Generational imaginary friends. When my little sister was between the ages of 2 and 6, this was long ago, she's 27 now, she had 2 imaginary friends, Madden and Jacob. She was 2 and she started talking about them in serious detail, like nonstop. Every girl in my family starts talking very young, and they're younger than the rest of us, so believe me, she was detailed. She told us their hair color, their skin color, and what they'd like to wear. Madden had pale skin, long blonde hair. Jacob had brown skin with black hair and a red baseball cap. We had no idea where she got the name Madden from. Seemed kind of random. Nobody in my house played Madden football, and she stayed home with me and my mom until she began school. She talked to them more than she talked to anybody in the family. She talked to them all the time until one day she just stopped. She started 1st grade, made some visible friends, and never mentioned Madden or Jacob again. We chalked it up to childhood imagination. Well, over 20 years later, I have a daughter. She began talking at 1, and by 18 months was talking like a pro. One day I was watching her jump on the bed. Mom, sorry, but she was 2, and as I was standing there, she looked at me and said, "Mama, go downstairs. We won't fall off." So I said, "Who won't fall off?" "The 5 little monkeys." She nonchalantly said, "No, me and Jacob and Madden." I was floored, but I immediately called my mom and sister to see if they'd mentioned Madden or Jacob recently. They both replied by saying that they forgot all about them, that we were all so weirded out. Even my super analytical engineer dad was like, "Whoa." I asked my daughter where she heard the names Madden and Jacob. She simply said, "They told me." Everybody I've told is like, "Oh, I'm sure one of you mentioned them," or maybe she was really little and just forgot about it. But I know that we didn't. And as I said, we all had forgotten about my sister's imaginary friends until my kid said that she was jumping with them. She's only mentioned them twice since then, and it's been months since she last did. Anyway, I think the story's nuts. What do y'all think? Another one that I like. Blue-eyed young boy at my window in broad daylight. A couple of years ago, my family and I had just gotten home mid-morning from a road trip vacation. Everything went to their rooms, or rather everyone. We went to get some sleep since we'd been traveling all night without rest. I wasn't too tired, so I just went to my room. Sitting on my bed, I had a direct view of my window that only has curtains, and that day, I had drawn my curtains open because it was quiet. It was pretty calm. It was the early afternoon, and the blue sky looked really nice. My window is about 6.5 feet tall from the ground outside. Now from my window, I can see my backyard, which is enclosed. We have a tall fence enclosing it, and all the gates are locked. It's hard to climb up for an adult, let alone a kid. I've tried often in my childhood to not forget my keys in the house, That's why what I saw next, I know did not come from the outside or another neighbor's home. Reading on my bed when I glance up at the window, and there I see him. A young boy at the window staring at me. I don't even know how I reacted. Did we leave the gates unlocked or what? I just stared back at him dumbfounded. He stared back at me with a very silent and childlike gaze. Then I realized that I could see him from the chest up, but he was not holding on to anything, or seemingly holding on to anything as, well, his hands looked like they were at his side. Recall that the bottom side of the window from the outside is about 7 feet tall. I felt uncontrollably uncomfortable, wondering how in the world he was able to get up that high. Thinking I was hallucinating or something, I drove off my bed and just, I approached the window. I kept eye contact and I noticed his eyes were so similar to the blue sky. I don't even know why, but that's the only feature I can remember now. Kind of cliche that the only color of his eyes was the thing that I remembered, but that was it. Besides him being a young boy. Then when I was a foot close to the window, he just vanished into thin air. Blink of an eye. Shocking to say the least, but looking out the window, there was nothing he could stand on and nowhere he could have ran to. Well, at least without me seeing him. I felt really uneasy, left the room afterwards, and eventually fell asleep in the living room away from any windows. I have no idea what it is that I saw. Looking back on it now, I'm still very sure that I did see it because I can remember exactly how I felt and how the events took place. When I remember it, I don't feel fear. Rather, in its place, a sense of calmness. Weird memories from my childhood. When I was very young, under 7, I used to live in a very rural small town. It was a great house, big and new. I lived with my sister, mother, and father. Once the powers died in my region, so we got some candles and stayed in the TV room. For some reason, I decided to go walk around the house. To understand this part, I have to explain a little bit about how my house is displayed. One half of the house, the one that meets the street, has a tall iron fence. The other half, which meets the neighbor's houses, has walls. As well as facing the part with the metal fence, looking at the room with lots of windows. The windows all had white curtains. I was walking towards that room when I saw a glowing bluish silhouette of a man on one window. It was a glow, like when a car shines its light upon something and it casts a shadow. But the odd thing is that the silhouette had like the light while the rest of the window was in the dark. I went back in silence to where my family was and told my dad that there was somebody in the house, inside that fenced-in area. He grabbed a knife since the power was out and there's no cell phones. Told us to stay inside while he searched the house. Came back sometime after. He said that he didn't see anything. Asked me if I was sure. The funny thing is I remember telling him, "Yes, Daddy, the blue man was behind that window." But there was nothing there. This other story also happened in that house, but I think I was a little bit more than 7. I just remember the before and after 7 of my childhood because my father passed away at that age. Everything gets a little bit blurry. I just remember when he was and wasn't around anymore. Okay, so back to the story. I was playing in the backyard with the ball by myself, and I'd been playing there for hours. I was kicking it into the backyard walls and running after it, things kids do. That's when suddenly my vision started to blur. The lights that we had on the walls were getting brighter and brighter. I started crying and looking around, and I began to scream. "It's full of angels here!" Over and over. My mom rushed to me and asked if I was all right. I just kept saying that. She held me to her arms, and all the lights and shadows kept getting closer and closer. I don't remember anything after that, and I don't like asking my mom too much about that time in the city that we lived in. I kind of think about this day quite a lot compared to the rest of my childhood. This is getting pretty long, so I'm just going to write down one more story. If you guys want, I have some more to share. We were still living at that house. I was still under 7. My sister's and my parents' bedrooms, they were under restoration, so we all slept in the guest room. The bed was in the middle with my parents on each side, and they had a mattress for me and my sister. And I must say that my mother's dad, my grandpa, he died shortly after I was born. I still have some pictures with me and him in his lap playing, but I don't have any memories with him. Don't quite see these pictures when I was that age. So I'm there in the dark bedroom trying to sleep. My eyes had adjusted to the dark and I see movement right above me. I look up to the ceiling and there he is, my grandpa. Like if he was coming through a portal of dark slime. His body was decaying and he was reaching for me. I started crying and saying, "Grandpa's here, I can see him." My parents woke up and comforted me, and they were kind of religious, so they said that he was looking after me. One more detail is that I heard my sister ask my mom, how did he recognize him? My mom answering, "I don't know." Don't know what to make of this. This story happened a little while ago, so I joined this community, but hoping to find someone with a similar experience to mine. Since my wife and I moved into this house about 10 years ago, I've had a number of small experiences, but it's recently changed. For years, something's been untying all my shoes every second or third day. Once or twice, my laces have even been removed. It's a tiny thing and a small annoyance. I know my wife doesn't do it because it happened more often when she's been away for work trips and such. I used to say out loud, "Oh no, my shoes. Good job, Ghost. This is a real problem for me." Sort of as a way to play it off as a joke and maybe have whatever is doing it maybe think this was enough to really get underneath my skin. Then about a year ago, while I was alone in the house, except for my enormous dog who was sleeping downstairs, something very clearly whispered my name into my ear from very close by. It sounded like it was inches from my left side. Right after my dog jumped up and ran up the stairs to the room I was in and started barking at something. Then about 3 months ago, whatever it was stopped messing with my shoes. Okay, fine. Then my wedding ring went missing, and I put it down to my side table to do dishes. Went back, gone. Well, fuck. So I spent days looking for it. 3 days later, I find it laying on the couch watching a movie. It was while my wife was at work. Something came flying up the basement stairs, hit a wall, and bounced into the dining room, just came to rest underneath the table. Hit the wall at an upward angle and hit hard. I went and checked it out, and it was my wedding ring. Then I heard something in the basement. There couldn't have been anyone down there. My wife was at work. There's no basement windows to come through. We had an alarm system installed when we moved in, and my large dog's very protective. Great Pyrenees are like that. That's when I decided that my dog needed a walk, and we noped out over to a friend's place for the day. It's been quiet since, kind of just waiting for something else to happen. That sounds actually scary to have your wedding ring fly up the stairs like that. Eerie encounters. Hunted by huge bipedal wolves. After working in a paper mill for 20 years, Eric Martin was forced to give up on his job in 2005 after falling down while trying to get something off the shelf. This fall left Eric with multiple slipped discs, and this meant that he couldn't work anymore. The situation forced his wife Shelley to start going to work after a really long time, and with the help of her connections, she was able to land a job in her hometown called Palmyra in Maine. The family were not eager to go on this small rural town since they had no other choice, but they ended up moving to Palmyra. Thanks to the town's low cost of living, the family were able to get a big farmhouse with the money that they had. Despite its beauty, The farmhouse was completely surrounded by forest, and it was extremely isolated. To reach the house, the family had to drive through a bumpy access road and then through a long driveway of the property. The farmhouse had a barn at about 20 meters on its left, and its front was open with about a clearing of 200 meters, followed by a tree line of the woods. Pulsating lights in the woods. During their first year at the house, Eric and Shelley made it a habit to sit on their front porch every night and drink coffee while looking at the front yard. So while Eric and Shelley were sipping on their coffee one night, Shelley noticed pulsating lights on the tree line in front of them. She immediately nudged Eric to show him that she was seeing something, and when Eric saw it, he instantly concluded that there was someone illegally hunting on his property. To ward off this apparent hunter, Eric gathered his son Sean, who had visited him that night, and walked toward the tree line to scare the hunter away. As they kept walking towards the tree line, Eric noticed that these pulsating lights were moving away from them. Within a few minutes, these lights moved back into the woods and disappeared. Eric and Sean had a hunch that maybe the hunter left. But to confirm it, they decided to take a few steps into the woods and check. A few minutes after entering the dense woods, Eric and Sean felt as if something was walking parallel to them. They clearly heard footsteps at around 10 meters on their left. It sounded as if this something was following them. Fearing that this something was a predator, Eric and Sean escaped the woods at once. A creepy den. About a month after this incident, Eric's daughter Chelsea, along with her boyfriend Nathan, decided to take a walk inside the woods along with their two family dogs. Chelsea removed the leash off the dogs after entering the tree line. They ran into the woods playing with each other, and after running for about 100 meters into the forest, the dogs came to a sudden halt. They started staring at something. When Chelsea and Nathan walked toward their dogs to see what they'd caught, whatever caught their attention, they saw what looked like a huge dirt pile. Upon getting a closer look, they understood that it was not a dirt pile, but an intentionally created den. It had huge bark making like this base structure, and these barks were covered with moss, grass, and other fillers. This den had a circular opening right in front of it. It allowed Nathan to take a look into this den. As Nathan was trying to find something relevant inside the darkness-filled den, he started hearing abnormal growling sounds coming from it. Nathan was startled by these growls, and without giving it a second thought, he took Chelsea and the dogs back home. After returning home, Nathan told Eric about this den, and it was then that they saw this den exactly in the place where Eric and Sean felt as if they were being stalked by some predator. Bipedal wolves on the tree line. A couple of months later, while Eric and Shelley were sitting on the front porch, sipping on their coffee one night, they noticed an eerily strange silence. They had been in this house for almost 2 years by then, and every night they heard multiple natural sounds coming from the forest during their late-night coffee times. That night, however, they heard no such sounds. The atmosphere around them was filled with pin-drop silence. As they kept speaking over the coffee, Eric suddenly felt as if they were in danger. He immediately started asking his wife to go back into the house. Shelley kept fighting back. In the middle of their tussle, the couple suddenly heard a strange growl. They immediately went silent. To see what was causing these sounds, Shelley flashed her light in the tree line, slowly scanning across it. As she scanned the tree line, she saw 3 unnaturally large wolves. They were slowly coming out of the center of the tree line. They were staring at them. Following them came 2 other wolves. But these wolves walked on 2 legs until they reached the tree line. Once these 2 bipedal wolves reached the tree line, they got on all fours, and the 5 of them started running towards Eric and Shelley. Despite having the head of a wolf, this animal was bipedal and too big to be a wolf. Eric, being an extremely experienced hunter, was not able to figure out what it was. Hunted all night. Without saying a word, the couple rushed back into the house. They locked the doors. Shelley immediately started running inside the house, closing all the windows with blinds and turning off the lights. Then she went into Chelsea's room, woke her up asking her to have a look at these animals. Chelsea was extremely frustrated at first, but looking at how scared her mom was, she walked to the window, parted the blinds, and peeked through it. Through the window, she saw these 5 huge figures standing in a row staring at the house as if they were waiting for them to come out. She was peeking. One of those animals stood on its hind legs like a human, looked dead at her. Chelsea was startled by the sheer size of this figure. It stood nearly 8 feet tall. Meanwhile, while she fell down gasping, Eric was thinking about going into the barn to retrieve his rifle. But he himself knew that no matter how fast he ran, he wouldn't be able to take out his rifle from his barn in time. So he decided to drive his truck to the doorstep, secure his family by driving them away. He slowly parted the blinds to the window near him, slowly peeked through to see where those 5 creatures were. He couldn't see the creatures out in the front porch, grabbed his keys, walked out of the house towards his truck. After he stepped out of the house, he noticed that they were standing in the clearing in front of the house. Thus, he walked towards his truck while keeping his eyes on them persistently. While he was about to open the truck door, he accidentally slipped his keys. Hearing the slight sound of these falling keys, these creatures started running toward him. Eric ran back into the house, grabbing his keys. As he closed the main door, these creatures started scratching the door aggressively. Eric rushed to the room where Shelley, Chelsea, and the dogs were present, and after making sure they were all right, he called the police, hoping that the sound of their vehicles would scare these creatures away. When Eric told the police about these creatures, they told him to lock the house, stay inside. Before Eric could say another word, they cut the call. Helpless families was left all alone. The family gathered in a room on the 2nd floor, locked its doors, windows, and barricaded them in the objects for extra protection. They huddled together and hoped for the dreadful night to end soon. For the remainder of the night, these 5 wolf-like creatures kept running around their locked house while bumping into walls and scratching through doors. They clearly seemed to communicate with each other and coordinate their moves. Smelling the scent of the family on the 2nd floor, these creatures jumped onto the roof on the 1st floor to try to get hold of them. When the family periodically peeked through the window in the room, they would see the silhouette of these wolf-like figures walking on the 1st floor roof on 2 feet. They occasionally heard the sound of aggressive scratching on the walls behind them, and it only kept getting worse as the night aged. But when it was dawn, they heard these creatures run back into the woods. When the family stepped out of their house, they noticed huge footprints with claws, tufts of fur all around their property, and their house was covered with freshly made deep claw marks. The family members were deeply traumatized by this incident, and they ended up moving out of the house. If that is indeed true, I would hope that you moved out of your house, or did something. Eerie Encounters. Haunted by a Ouija board. Friend from hell. In the spring of 1988, an El Salvadorian family of 5 moved into their new house in Houston, Texas. The family was made of a 13-year-old Mel Trejo, her mother Chavez, her father Jose, her younger sister Jackie, and her older sister Maria. Because of the house's small size, the sisters didn't have separate rooms, thus all 3 of them had to sleep in a single bedroom. They weren't particularly excited about it. Jose, however, was extremely happy when they moved into this house, as, well, he believed he could carve a better future for his wife and daughters by staying in the United States. Mel gets a hold of a Ouija board. A few weeks after moving into the house, while the family were having their dinner together, Maria talked about a board game that gave answers to everybody. Well, let's just say a board that gave answers to every asked question. This board was called the Ouija board. She insisted that the family could play it together and pleaded with Chavez to go to the board for her. Although Chavez didn't know much about how to, get one or how the game worked, she decided to get it for her daughter, since all of them could play it. When Chavez finally got them a Ouija board, the girls ran into the room with excitement to play it. Maria had a blatant idea about how to play this game, and 3 rules, apparently, that should be followed. But she wasn't particularly sure about what these 3 rules were, so she read out loud the rules on the sheet that came with the board. This sheet had 3 rules, and they were: Rule number 1, never play alone. Rule number 2, always say goodbye when you're done playing. Rule number 3, never play in your own house. Despite reading these rules, the girls instantly broke the 3rd rule as they started playing with the board in their own house. They placed the planchette on the board, placed their fingers on the planchette, and Maria asked the board, "Is anybody there?" As they didn't get any response, Maria asked the same question for the 2nd time. Even this time, nothing happened. But then Chavez also came into their room, and she watched the girls play with their new game. Maria asked the same question for the 3rd time, and the planchette started moving toward the word yes on the board. As everybody kept staring at the board in astonishment, Jackie started laughing and revealed that she was the one moving it. As the board didn't seem to work, the sisters kind of lost interest in it, left the room after pushing it under Mel's bed. A new Ouija board friend. Mel had just gotten into middle school, and she was finding it really hard to make friends. To make it worse, a girl named Erica was terribly bullying her. She was scared to walk out of her classroom. Every day after school, Mel would go back to her home feeling extremely sad. She felt like she had nobody to open up to about her situation. As things were getting worse day by day, Mel decided to use the Ouija board to open up, and, well, when Mel greeted the board, nothing seemed to happen at first, but within a few moments the planchette started moving around the board and it spelled hi. After this, Mel asked if it could help her get rid of her bully. The planchette moved to yes. The next day, when Mel went to school, she heard her teacher announce Erica's permanent exclusion from school. After school, Mel rushed back to her room and asked the Ouija board if it was behind Erica's expulsion. To her surprise, it replied yes. And the next moment, the planchette moved around the board and so on, and it spelled out, "I am your friend," without Mel asking any questions. Mel was happy that she finally had a friend. A demon in the house. That night, Mel's parents went out on a date, leaving their daughters all alone in the house. As they kept watching TV while sitting in the living room, Mel started feeling a sharp pain in her head. She went to the kitchen to take a painkiller. While Mel was about to walk out of the kitchen, she started hearing footsteps from the house's fenced backyard. They kept getting closer and closer, only to suddenly stop. As Mel slowly peeked out of the kitchen window, a terrifying demonic face suddenly appeared right on the window. Mel screamed her lungs off, ran to the living room in fear. When Maria asked her what happened, Mel told her about the demonic face. To see what this face was, Mary gathered up her 2 sisters and slowly walked toward the kitchen. On their way, they started to hear footsteps coming from the floor above them. The ceiling above started to creak. It appeared as if somebody was heavy walking upstairs. Thinking they had an intruder, the girls grabbed their shoes as weapons and slowly walked upstairs. Following the sound of the footsteps, they reached their parents' closed bedroom. As Mel started twisting the doorknob, the footsteps suddenly stopped. When the girls turned on the lights after entering the room, they found no one. As they stood there staring at the empty room, Chavez and Jose returned home. The girls rushed to their parents and told them about what happened, but Jose's eyes rolled back. He uncharacteristically shouted to them. He asked them to go to bed at once. Jose had never acted like that before. It appeared as if something had taken control over him. Pulled under the bed. The next time Mel spent with the Ouija board increased gradually with time, and at one point all she cared about was spending more time with him. Marie and Chavez were getting worried about her obsession with the board, but they weren't able to stop her from using it. As this kept continuing, one night Mel woke up from her sleep because of the sound of loud dragging footsteps in her room. and these footsteps seemed to be walking towards her. When slowly got down from her bed to see what was walking in her room, something grabbed her leg, started dragging her underneath the bed. Using all her strength, Mel escaped his clutches, pulled herself into Maria's bed. A handmade Ouija. Hearing Mel scream, her parents rushed to her bedroom. When Mel told her mother about what had just happened, she felt that her daughter was imagining things. According to Chavez, Mel's obsession with the Ouija board was the reason behind this occurrence. So with the help of her husband, she grabbed the Ouija board from her daughter, threw it to a dumpster outside their house. After her mother snatched away the Ouija board from her, Mel started to miss her newly found friend. So one day she decided to make her own board with cut-out letters, and she used an inverted drinking glass as a planchette. And she tried communicating with her, mysterious friend using her handmade board. Well, her new friend responded. When Mel asked the spirit about its gender, the inverted glass moved around and spelled female. The family splits. One night when Mel was walking toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water, she heard eerie, nonsensical chanting coming from the living room of the house. When she walked to the living room to see what was making these chants, she saw her father. He was making these chants with his eyes rolled back, and it appeared as if he was under control of someone else. That night onward, Mel's father's behavior completely changed. The very next night, Marie and Jackie were in the living room. Their father stormed into the house and walked straight into their mother and started an argument. He was extremely aggressive. His voice made Mel tremble in fear. So, she immediately used her handmade board and asked her spirit friend if she could make him go away. The board spelled yes. The very next moment, Maria started feeling intense heat. She started to feel extreme rage. Possessed by this unknown rage, she grabbed her father's loaded gun and pointed it toward her father, with her father saying that she did not have the guts to shoot him. The situation started to grow tense. It made Maria pull the trigger. Luckily, her mom pushed her arm up. Bullet hit the ceiling. Wow, instead of her father. Hearing the gun sound, Maria came back to her senses, claimed that something overtook her. Chavez felt something evil was there in the house, and thus she, along with her daughters, moved away from their house and settled into another apartment. The possession. Mel was finding it hard to adapt to life without her father, and this pushed her more towards the Ouija board. One afternoon, while playing with the board, Mel asked her friend from where she had come from, and the moving drinking glass on the board moved around, spelling "from hell." This answer freaked Mel out. She ran away from the room after putting all the cut-out letters inside the drinking glass. Just after taking a few steps, Mel heard a loud shattering sound from her room, and it stopped her. When she walked back to her room to see what had caused the sound, she saw the drinking glass that she used as a planchette shattered into pieces, and the cut-out letters she used for her Ouija board were shredded and flying around. Mel's mysterious spirit friend started showing her violent side. As she stood in the room, Mel heard whispers in her ear. They asked her to check under her bed. When she anxiously slid her hand under her bed, she found the original Ouija board that her parents had previously dumped. Later that night, Chavez was woken up from her sleep. That was because of a feeling of extreme cold. When she opened her eyes to correct her blanket, she started hearing footsteps in the hallway. The door of Chavez's room didn't have a knob fitted in the designated hole, and thus it had a small opening in the place of the knob. So she slowly walked out of her bed and peeked through the hole in her door, to see who's walking in the hallway. The moment she peeked through this hole, the footsteps stopped. To the very next moment, the demonic face of a woman suddenly appeared in front of her. Chavez fell back on the floor in fear, but she gathered herself up and peeked through the hole again, only to find demonic face missing. She immediately rushed to her daughter's room to make sure that they were safe, and much to her relief, they were indeed safe. One evening while the family were getting ready for dinner, Mel suddenly got a feeling of being watched by someone. When she told her mom about it, she immediately shut her down, thinking she was trying to escape from helping her prepare the dinner. After she finished cooking, Chavez asked Mel if they could get dinner plates. When Mel walked toward the shelf to get the plates, she saw a demonic creature standing in the living room. Before she could call her mom to show it to her, it disappeared. A few minutes later, she was pushed into the couch in the living room by something invisible. She passed out because of falling short of breath. As Mel's mom was trying to bring her back to consciousness, she suddenly sat upright and with her eyes closed started gesturing with her hands wildly. Her skin started turning purple. It appeared as if she was being possessed. Mel fell unconscious again and woke up and completely forgotten the events that preceded. The exorcism. After this event, Mel became really sick, and despite Chavez taking her to multiple doctors, she wasn't able to have her daughter cured. Family friends suggested taking Mel to a witch doctor named Alice, and Chavez obliged. After examining Mel, Alice concluded that something evil was breaking Mel down. She made Mel sit in front of a mirror, made her close her eyes, and asked Chavez to look at her reflection. When Chavez looked into the mirror, she saw the same demonic face that she had seen, like the one she had previously seen through the hole in her door. The figure screamed and the mirror shattered into pieces. When Alice asked her if she had any recent interaction with something paranormal, she told her about her new friend from hell, whom she communicated with using her Ouija board. Alice told Chavez that an exorcism should be performed on her daughter. She instructed her to burn the board. So Chavez called Jose, told him about the location of the board, and asked him to burn it immediately. Alice began the exorcism. She started sprinkling holy water on Mel. For Mel, who was covered under a cloth, however, these, hitting water droplets felt like painful punches. Meanwhile, Jose got a hold of the board and set it on fire just as Chavez asked him to. When the board was burning, Mel felt as if she herself was burning from the inside. This pain was unbearable for her. Finally, when the Ouija board completely turned into ashes, Mel collapsed onto the floor and she was back to her original self. Paranormal events that followed her ceased after burning the Ouija board. It seems like half of the time that works, and the other time, well, the other half. It's a terrible idea. But sleeping's a good idea. See ya.